we'll start first with our first keynote speaker, who is John Shaw. John is a longtime friend and Chief Technology Officer at Sage Publications. He will be joined by two of his colleagues in his presentation today, Kevin Muha, who is President of Global Village Publishing, and Steph Garrett, who is Chief Executive Officer at PodDB. So John, I'll pass the mic on to you, and I'll stop sharing my screen. You are set to go.
Great, just hold 1 second, everyone, while I get a PowerPoint up. And let's see, it's going to give me the option for 2 different screens. Perfect. Let me know if you are seeing the right screen.
Yes, I can see your slides.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Todd. And thank you, Jill, for bringing us together and putting this whole program together. We really appreciate it. And Todd, thanks for the great intro. It feels like you knew exactly what we were going to talk about before we even talked through that. So great job there. So good morning and afternoon for everyone joining today. We're really excited to be with you and kicking off this virtual event. I'm John Shaw and CTO of Sage Publishing, and I am joined by my colleagues, Steph Garrett, Product Director and Entrepreneur, and Kevin Muha, President and CEO of GBPI, a Sage company. Let's see if I can get my screens to advance, though. That's the big challenge of the day here. If we can do that, then I think we're going to be good for a while. Okay, so Todd, you had brought up dinosaurs, and I brought up cave people. So it seems, again, we're on the same wavelength this morning. So we're going to get things going by discussing technical debt and why reengineering is important. The next 25 minutes is going to be in a fishbowl style discussion, rapid format, where you will watch us discuss this topic live and then have a chance to ask questions both after the session and then the following sessions that Todd had just mentioned. So let's get right into things. First, I thought it would be good for us to just get a common definition of what technical debt is. Here's a definition largely taken from Wikipedia. And you can see that the individual that coined that term has also provided a quote here, which helps us just put some context to technical debt. So I'm going to let you read that just for a second. Okay. So now that we have some context behind the definition of technical debt, let's look a little at the 3 primary types of technical debt. So these have been broken out to what is largely understood as the 3 types. So the deliberate technical debt is the idea that certain works get delayed in order to hit a deadline. And that's typically good technical debt. Yes, there is good technical debt. There's accidental or outdated technical debt, which is due to balancing future-proofing the design versus addressing the current needs for a faster delivery. And my favorite, just because of the name, is bit rot technical debt, which occurs over time due to many bug fixes and enhancements added to the systems and technology changes. And that just is legacy, as Todd was noting, around older systems. You just keep building onto them, and it just naturally happens no matter how hard you try. So with this common understanding that we all have, let's get to our first discussion point. Excuse me while I take down our slides, and you're going to see our faces in the virtual live flesh, and we're going to get into some of our first questions. So let me, again, get out of this in my screen as well. Hopefully everyone can see let's see. I've got to get to my own screens here, but I won't delay any further. So Stephanie and Kevin, good morning. Hopefully you're both here with us, yes?
Good morning, yes. Very happy to be here.
All right. Hey, Kevin. So let's get to our first question. In your opinion, what causes technical debt?
I guess I'll kick that off. There's a multitude of reasons for technical debt, so we'll only cover a few of them today. First one that comes to my mind is that when you're designing a new solution or even a new feature on an existing solution, you don't typically know enough about it to be able to design it properly. So right off the bat, you're going to be designing you're going to have some technical debt, and you're going to have to figure out when's the right time, when will I know more about it, and how do I get that back on track to really be take care of that technical debt before it gets out of control. Another reason is people aren't infallible, unfortunately, and we all make mistakes. Typical developer will make, dozens of minor decisions every day, potentially 3 or 4 major decisions on a weekly basis. Some of those are just going to be mistakes, flat out mistakes. Another thing is lack of time and resources. Do we ever have enough time and resources to do a project? I don't know of any project ever that had enough time and resources. So the larger that disparity is between what you need to do and the amount of time you have to do it, the more technical debt you're going to rack up. Another thing is it changing in technology over time. And if you think about security, for an example, from compared to what we tested for several years ago to what's been happening now with all the breaches and everything, the system that was built several years ago is going to need to be updated and address that technical debt around security. You're going to be hacked. And another one to think about is accessibility. The sites need to be more accessible, and compared to the way we've done it several years ago, there's a lot more effort that we need to do to address the technical debt of sites not being as accessible as they need to be. And in reality, sites are never completely accessible, so there's always work that can be done there. And with that, I'll let someone else chime in.
Yeah. All of that, plus I think some other things that cause technical debt are the evolution of content and the systems around it and how the consumers or users are coming to it. So one of the big things for me in the product world are new integrations with other providers and other platforms. If we've built from the ground up a specific system, but now there's an opportunity for a new external provider or partner to be integrated with our platform or system, that wasn't what its intention was, but that integration might make sense now, whereas it didn't maybe 5 to 10 years ago. Also, technical debt comes from just having to live on the open web and create solutions or fix problems. One of the biggest examples of that is having good page rank and being searchable on the open web on Google and Bing. I mean, the number of times over the years that the pages and systems that we want to be presented to the open web and highly ranked, the rationale from Google or from one of those engines, it changes. And so there was no technical debt when we went out. That was exactly what was asked of us. But over time, page rank rules change and we have to adjust to those pretty regularly. And that causes something that we don't want to deal with. It's not feature related. We, as in people who just want to build products and find solutions versus working through the background. Also, rules of paid search. When I started my career, there was no budget line item in the marketing plan for your Facebook budget. That wasn't a thing. I didn't know what it would do. I didn't think we needed to spend money anywhere in that space. But if you're going to spend money there, that has an impact on your specific product or service and how it's built. And so there just could be things that you need to integrate with, like social media platforms or other consumer areas that have the audience you want and bringing them to your experience. All of those things could cause technical debt, and we haven't even really started trying. And I think, just to say one more statement, when we get on to trying, the enhancements over time add up. So I get quite visionary at the very beginning when the budget and the business plan is signed off, and I know that it's time for the team to kick off into development. And I see a path of 5 years of enhancements that I'd like to add on to the product when I'm first going to market. And that, scares everyone in the development, but also I am, just by having that much planned in the future, I'm already building in a really good chance that I'm going to increase the technical debt versus doing it in a different way. So I'll pause there to see if John, you want to add anything?
Yeah, maybe I'll add one other point that we touched around, and it's something that I've recently had to work through in taking on the enterprise systems, the back end type of work within the organization. So I'm so used to working with Kevin and Stephanie on building our new products for the libraries. But when you get into those enterprise systems, the back end systems themselves, those are the ones that typically do have a good amount of technical debt in them. And the thing that we were talking about that really hit was that, not only do those systems get pretty old over time and they don't get invested in as much, but you make decisions early on in how they can support your product systems. And sometimes you make the wrong decisions of which enterprise system to put it in. Those start getting a little jumbled up, and over time you realize you made some wrong decisions, but you didn't go back to fix them. And as I said, those get the least amount investment, whereas the products get the most amount of investment. And so it just all builds up. And over time, that technical debt is like a building on bad foundation. So it's a natural thing. So that's great. That, I think, gives us some context here. It leads to a second question that I think is worthwhile spending a couple minutes on. And that really, and we touched a bit on it, but what are the issues that arise from technical debt? Steph, do you want to take the lead on that one?
I do, because I'm going to try not to spend 2 minutes just saying all the things that could arise. But I think the way that I distill this for product people and people who are not the developers working on the details at that point, is that we are always in the midst of context switching when we are building a product or maintaining a product or thinking about the product. And so the way that I would think about technical debt is usually the first question and conditions that I'm asking myself is where my product is in the life cycle. So if I'm a new entry product, but it's an existing market, say a new product sold to libraries or sold to teaching and learning centers at universities or research institutions, but I've never created that specific service or product before, I probably have a high risk tolerance for debt, because what I need to get out of that experience is to learn exactly what the market wants and to validate what I think the problem and solution is and what type of investment we might need. So you really can't avoid in that early market stage, that early product stage, you can't avoid tech debt completely, because you don't know what you're getting into and you don't know necessarily what your product opportunity is going to be. So for instance, I had an experience where, let's take it even further. There's no market. It's a market making product, but you see the problem and you see a potential solution. I had an instance where the real solution for the early market was a framework in Erlang. To this day, I'm still not really familiar with all that Erlang as a framework and language can do to support, but it was what was available. It was a tool that the developer and the engineer knew at that moment, and it would help get me into the market so that I could validate whether actually this is an idea that's worth continuing on. So in that early market phase, I would say that the tech debt is the time wasted and the solution used. I still am always going to go to market with a spreadsheet process, because if I try to scale it at the beginning, I might make the wrong decisions. But that's a tech debt that I have a lot of comfort for. Very quickly, if this is a growing product and I need to go from 0 institutional customers to say 50 institutional customers in 6 months, and really in that premise, each institution might represent 50 to 100,000 users. Well, okay, hold on. My appetite for tech debt is so low, we can't do this wrong. Whatever solutions we are making or creating, I want the development and engineering teams and other stakeholders around me to challenge what will help this solution scale to the market that we know that we're going after. So when you have a product that's in that growing or establishing period, you want to build, and I want to build solutions that are sustainable and that reduce tech debt. Also, I start to move towards simplification. If I want to have 60 customers or 100 customers, I want to make that solution and product more simpler for the wider group. And then if it's a really mature product, I am looking at the smallest impact to the customer for the shortest period of time. Let's say I make it to that 60, and now I'm in 2,500 institutions, God willing. If I'm in that point in the product line, that's really lovely, but we can't impact the experience for those 2,500 institutional customers and all of those users. So if we need to actually change from physical servers to cloud-based servers, just as an example, for a mature product line in 2020 that's been around for, say, 10 years, I am looking to make sure that we make whatever decision will balance out the revenues that we're not going to keep growing upon. So maybe it's AWS as the cloud solution, but if there is a smaller, cheaper, less complicated solution, I might go towards that, because tech debt is not, it's not as big of a concern for me in the mature stage unless we're going to continue building services on top of it or products on top of that, which has tech debt. And in retiring a product or the declining phase, I just want to set up an ongoing process to maintain the minimal digital industry standards. When it was 2007, it was 508 ADA compliance. In 2020, it's WCAG AA compliance. Now, that puts me in a tough position because I do have tech debt, even though I thought about accessibility. But the reality is, even if that product is available and live, there needs to be some maintenance to move it to those standards that have been established now while it's still in the market. So that's not just a couple of minutes, but those are my thoughts about how I organize and think about the issues.
That's awesome, Steph. You covered so many different things there. I think you even touched on some additional points that we'll get into in some of our other questions that we'll ask. Kevin, I want to throw it over to you for your perspective from the engineering side.
Sure. Yeah, I'll look at it from the developer perspective, as John mentioned. One of the things that really causes, if the code's overly complex due to all this tech debt, the team is not going to be as efficient. It's going to take them longer to figure out how to make enhancements and longer to figure out how to fix bugs. And as a result, there are going to be more inefficiencies. And so you're going to either need a larger team size or they're going to get less done. That's just not the engineers and the developers, but that's also the QA team and UAT and everybody else involved. Another issue is that when code's not written cleanly and you have a lot of tech debt, it may not perform as well. And poor performing sites cause a lot of issues. It can hurt your SEO, as Steph mentioned earlier, that Google ranks pages based on how well the page load speeds occur. And if they don't occur fast enough, you're not going to get as high a ranking, which is going to impact your sales. Another reason is it frustrates users. And I don't know about you, but I get very impatient. If I go to a site and it doesn't perform in the way I expect it to, I'm like, if they can't even get that part right, why should I trust them on the rest? And I'm moving on. Another thing that happens is it causes, you have an increase in your direct costs. If you move to the cloud and you're running in the cloud and your pages are slower loading, you're using up more resources and you're going to have a direct effect on your costs. So you have to be fanatical about addressing tech debt when it drives up your cloud hosting costs. Another area is poor team morale. You may have the inability to retain your staff or potentially even recruit new staff. And top quality developers want to use the later code. They want to work on clean code, and they don't, they want to keep their resume current. They're always looking out for their own best interests as well as the interests of the company. But those all really affect your team, and your team is everything when you're developing these platforms and products.
Yeah, maybe Kevin, I'll just pick up on a couple things listening between you and Steph. Looking at it from a management perspective, I think when you get into technical debt, you start dealing with missed project deadlines just because the efficiency of what's being worked on is not there. And so it's really hard to really plan out exactly how that project's going to go. And you just run into all types of things that you don't expect that you're going to be dealing with, right? I think you addressed it, but added project costs come in. All of a sudden, your delays add to time and materials, and it just keeps running up. You get risky code releases. Think of the fact that the technical debt is growing and growing. All of a sudden, you're doing hot fixes, and you have an unstable code base, and you're unsure about even releasing anything. And so it just makes everyone kind of bite their nails thinking about how it's going to run. Ultimately, lost revenue. Things aren't going to be working the way you want to, and then lost time and efforts that could be spent elsewhere. So I think it leads to a ton of issues, and you got to think about when the right points of investment are, and when you cut your losses, and when you start over, and just making the good decisions up front, of course. So I just wanted to say, in all the things that we're talking about, there are some great sessions for the next 2 days that will get into some of these issues in far more detail. And I think that I'm looking forward to hearing kind of how these are addressed. So we don't have a lot of time left in our fishbowl. I feel like we're swimming really fast in circles here, or maybe there's a shark chasing us. But let's talk a little bit on what we think would cause, or why you would want to cause intentional technical debt. I think we've touched on a couple of these points already, so maybe just spend a few minutes per person on this, or 30 seconds per person on this. Kevin, do you want to kick us off on this one?
Sure. One good reason is, and Steph kind of touched upon it earlier, was fast prototyping. You don't really know what the market's going to bear. You don't know how the product's even necessarily going to be shaped and formed. And so you want to prototype it quickly. You want to just shoestring it together, get it out there, see how the market reacts. And if it doesn't take off, then you can just kill it. If it starts taking off, then you can start either building a new system that really addresses it, or start addressing the technical debt on that system and build from that.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I would just add, not wanting to wait for the product or allowing the technical debt. Just from the product perspective, I think after a while, if you've done it a few times of developing a product or putting it into market, or you've seen others do it, you start to know what you need to avoid. And I think sometimes you need to stress test that what you're doing. So for instance, there was a period where Kevin and I were building a streaming video platform together. And I remember our conversations around what would happen tomorrow if I were to get 800 hours of video and dump it onto the platform. And he laughed in my face and said bad things, but let's figure out what we can actually do and how it would scale and what our solutions are. So sometimes when you know what could happen or what might happen, you can just get the team to start thinking about that, and we can plan ahead of it, or we can throw about 50 videos on it, see what page load speeds time. So we can build that into the early development and research process, because we know what's coming around the pipe if success occurs in your product.
Yeah, I think that's great, Steph. And I'm not going to go into this one too much, because I think you addressed it a lot in your previous responses and right now. Maybe again, just a quick roundtable. So when thinking about the causes of technical debt, I was running this through with Kevin and Stephanie and saying, well, where do some of the causes come from? Does it come from management? Does it come from the product managers? Sorry, Steph. Developers, do they cause it sometimes? So how might these roles play into technical debt? And Steph, you want to take the lead on this one first?
Yeah, my role would cause technical debt by not creating alliances, not asking difficult or deeper level questions, and by not explaining what I think the goals are. I think that's my response, is that the product role has the responsibility of really organizing and communicating that which is being organized and delivered on to other stakeholders. And the worse that I communicate, or my poor management of that process or my relationship, that is really one of the most intentional ways. And I think the other thing is not being honest about timelines for delivery in the product group. Is you want it now, the market is hot or not hot, or you think you're going to make it. And I think talking the personality types that are generally in product, which are very interested in building out solutions and making, fixing things, I think that ultimately leads to, if you don't do that very well and communicate with the team, because no product manager is generally every single role, failure is soon to come, always, when you don't create alliances.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that. As a role as playing CTO, or just working with a lot of our executives, that a lot of times the pressure does come from the top, wanting to get something to market, asking the team just to do anything they can, and pushing it through, and you just have to make some decisions, right? And then that ultimately plays on just a lot of times executives naturally won't understand the cause of technical debt or the impacts of it. And so, and they don't have the time to really get into it all the time. So I think they can force in some decisions that maybe aren't always the best.
Do you think, John, they should? Do you think that they should get more involved?
I think the teams and the product owners and product managers need to take the time to explain some
That's what I think too.
Future impacts back to the business, right? Because it really could affect future spend, the performance of the products. It just goes on and on. So I think it's not right for the team just to be quiet and go forward with that.
Yeah.
Kevin, maybe 10 seconds, and then we'll wrap up and see if we have any immediate questions.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, some things that try to prevent technical debt is having, do pair programming where 2 minds are more than 2 times 1 mind, and you get better results. Having code review, we build that into our Agile DevOps pipeline to make sure every piece of code gets reviewed so you get a second perspective. And then knowing the bias of your developers, you have to really understand the developers. Certain ones don't like any technical debt when sometimes it's needed. Others don't really care if there's a ton of technical debt. So you have to know the bias when they're trying to describe the impact of the technical debt and knowing how best to translate that into where to spend your time.
Yeah. Kevin, do you think, can you watch things like systems performance and kind of see these things happening? Can you monitor based on other means to see if the code has been written well and you use that as an indicator of something going on?
Yeah, a lot of times you'll see poor performing sites like we talked about earlier, or it takes longer to make changes. If there's bug fixes and you fix 1 bug and 4 more pop up, that's maybe an indication that the code isn't written well, or it takes longer to implement new solutions and new enhancements. All those are indicators that probably the code's not as clean as it needs to be and you may have too much technical debt.
Yeah. Just makes me think that good UAT is probably an important thing to add in. Each one of these roles are so important in cross-checking and checking one another.
Yeah, I was just going to say, assessing the definition of done to meet the understanding of the product quality, that is critical. And those 4 bugs that popped up, they wouldn't have potentially if definition of done was maybe described with a level of detail.
Yeah. Exactly right. Okay, thank you. We could go on for hours and days, and this was just to try to get us warmed up for the next sessions that are going to really jump into this in much more detail. So at this point, we're going to hand it back over and see if there's any immediate question because of time, and then we'll be available. I'll be available in the later session of questions to come back for anything that you might have.
Sure. John, I really appreciate that. And seriously, I could sit and listen to you guys talk for a long time. You just touched on so many fascinating angles of kind of thinking of technical debt as a strategy is a super interesting concept. A question from one of the participants. Would you say agile development or MV minimum viable product leads to technical debt? Is that, does that come from where you're starting?
Who wants to go first? I'll go first because I spoke.
I want you to do it, Steph. We talked about this in so many angles.
So I would say it does. It can lead to technical debt just as easily as waterfall could lead to technical debt. I think, but my current thinking and philosophy is that technical debt is reduced in an agile environment because technical debt doesn't become this dirty word. It's just a theme that you need to get through. And there's 2 ways to look at this. You can do it through continuous improvement, and within each kind of sprint or delivery time period that's shortened, you always are doing a little technical debt. But if the technical debt is big and you need to do more incremental movement of those problems, Agile allows for that too. So accessibility enhancements, I hate to keep going back to that, but it's a good example. When you sometimes have 400 pages, know whether, or deciding whether you're going to make sure that the pages are accessible in each sprint and work on it throughout the year is a very different project than saying, actually, we're going to spend two-week sprints, 4 weeks on accessibility improvements and pushing everything out. So I think that Agile allows for tech debt to like actually be managed and addressed over the course of feature development and other things, unless you can't and you need to stop and do it. But I don't think it creates it any more than waterfall based and your stakeholders potentially doing it.
Steph, I wouldn't change a thing you said. I would just use one other word, which is Agile can help technical debt and help you to possibly manage it. But it comes down to the team really acknowledging how they want to do it, because if the product owner, if the development team, the executives don't let you build it into the process, then it just builds up. And so it is, as Todd said, it's a strategy, and you have to build that strategy in regardless of the type of development that you're doing. I think Agile leads to a lot of opportunity to do it well, though.
That's well said.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you, Kevin and Steph and Todd. Appreciate the time this morning.
Yeah, thank you so much, John, for organizing this. This is a fantastic way to kick us off. Really appreciate the time and appreciate your thoughts here.
Thank you.